Hello, everyone. Today is July 3rd, 2024. It's Wednesday and the day before 4th of July. And I'm here with Walter Naumann, and we're going to have a little talk about his time in Vietnam.
Okay.
Walter, so tell me a little bit about your service and how did you get started in your campaign in Vietnam?
How did I get started in Vietnam? I was drafted out of pre-med school at the University of Minnesota in 1967 because I was going nowhere fast. Ended up in Fort Campbell, Kentucky for basic training. And when I was there, I saw these tadpole-shaped helicopters flying overhead, and I thought that would be pretty neat. So I volunteered for flight school. However, after finishing basic training, I went to Fort Polk, Louisiana for AIT. I was headed to be an indirect fire infantryman or mortarman, MOS 11 Charlie. And then I got my orders for flight school. They came through, so I was transferred to Fort Walters, Texas, the Army's primary flight school, which is just west of Fort Worth, and started out there. Half of the time was ground school for helicopter basics and military stuff. The other half was down on the flight line. I actually did poorly in flight school. I didn't learn to hover in the first 6 weeks. I kept over-controlling and craft to keep going back and forth, sideways and whatnot. My instructor pilot, or IP, was a Vietnam veteran, and he was darned if he was going to let some stupid student kill him after surviving all those days in Vietnam. So he was a little bit uptight, and I was, of course, too. So, what they instead of sending me back to infantry, which was the usual thing for dropouts or whatever, they recycled me, and I thought, wow, that's a good deal. It wasn't until much later I realized that helicopter pilots had such a high mortality rate that, back in 67, 68, they needed a lot of them. So anyway, my next instructor was a civilian employee of Page Aviation, and he was very well laid back man, and we got along okay, and I learned to hover. I could make a little excursus about hovering if you want.
Yeah, I'd love to hear it. So,
well, yeah, there's a trick to it, and the trick is that the helicopter will go wherever it's pointed. However, so you develop what's called a sight picture when you're sitting in the seat there, and the horizon's over there. Okay, so you're straight and level, and the horizon's over there. Well, what happens if the horizon drops? Well, if you don't do anything, you're going to go forward. And so you have a fraction of a second or a second or whatever to pull back on the cyclic stick to adjust the sight picture where it should be. And once you get that little bit of a delay figured out without, as I said, over controlling, it doesn't take much. You could just hover with, well, not in the primary trainer. The primary trainer I had was the Hughes 300, which the Army called the TH-55, which had direct linkage to the flight control system, no power assist. So anyway, I could go on with the Hughes TH-55 or go on in flight school, whichever you like.
I'm curious about, you said they had you trying to learn to hover for about 6 weeks.
Yeah, that was, at that point, if you didn't learn it by then they either washed you out or recycled you. In my case, I was probably
What year did you go in, Walter?
I went in '67, as I said before.
Yeah. So after 6 weeks the first time, how long did it take you the second time with your new instructor?
Oh, I don't know. The whole, I don't remember the whole duration of primary flight school. The whole thing, primary and secondary, took about a year. So,
About a year? Okay.
Yeah, so, by 6 weeks I was hovering. I don't know how long it took to solo, but that all went relatively smoothly after that.
So, but you were in training for about a year.
In flight school for about a year.
About a year. Okay. And how long then after that, after you were certified, how long before they shipped you off to Vietnam?
Well, I don't remember. I had a couple of weeks of leave. I had 3 weeks of medical orientation at Brooke Army Medical Center in Fort Sam Houston, where they taught us various interesting things, such as how to do a tracheostomy and save somebody's life if their upper airway is obstructed. They also gave us good instruction on how to give shots, which no one in medical school or anywhere else along the line gave me that instruction that good.
Wow.
Walter and I had two similar driving forces called a draft board. I'm serious.
Uh-huh.
My draft board was 30 years ahead of you, but his draft board was also.
Yeah. Very good. Very good.
Go ahead.
No, I'm just saying, hello. I remember I went down there and I said, street my visit, my father's business and blah, 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 talking about my father just died and I had the plumbing and my mother was there and not with me, but that at the draft board, and the guy says, well, that's tough.
Not
I
all.
thought to myself, why don't you take your cousin? Because you won't get me, you son of a bitch, I'm going to go in the Navy. But I didn't want to say that to him out loud.
Yeah.
But to say that to somebody, that's tough. There's various ways of talking about it. We have this or that, or regretfully, we need people, and rationally. But to say to somebody, that's tough, with a caustic way, that's not nice.
Yep.
Go.
All right.
Shut up and
Back-
we're talking about
Back to
water.
Walter. All right. So, do you remember the day where they told you have to leave to Vietnam?
No, I don't. After primary flight school, I went to Thunder Army Airfield in Savannah, Georgia, transitioned to the Huey, which was like a Cadillac compared to the little Jews.
Right.
And there we went through what they call transitioning and had instrument training, training in flight, in formation flying and insertion into LZs and that sort of thing. So after that, I was granted a rank of warrant officer grade 1, and the obligation for me was 3 years of service from that point, whereas when I started out it was only 2 years being drafted. So anyway, went home for leave. I went to Fort Sam Houston, and then from San Francisco off to Vietnam. There's a couple of musical things that stick in my mind. One is the song, I think it's by the Monkees, that says, "Take the last train to Clarksville."
Yeah.
Clarksville is the train station that's closest to Fort Campbell, Kentucky. So that's where I was going. And the second one was Scott McKendy's, if you're going to San Francisco, be sure to wear some flowers in your hair. So there's gentle people there. So that's where I took off for Vietnam from there.
Oh, how did you go? Via Japan or Korea or what?
On the way over, we stopped in Hawaii for refueling, but they didn't let us off the plane. It was a charter flight, World Airways. I swore that if I ever had a chance, I'd never fly World Airways again. You know, but I didn't have the chance. But that's what I thought about that.
And how were you feeling when you landed in Vietnam? What was the atmosphere?
It was hot and humid and stinky. It smelled like sort of like a sewer, you know. And it took time to get used to the heat.
Uh-huh. Did you know the fatality rate?
No, I didn't.
You didn't.
That's why I thought it would be nice to be flying in the air instead of pounding through the rice paddies or through the jungles.
Uh-huh. And when did you start to hear about the real fatality rates of the pilots?
Oh, only a couple of years ago when I did a little research.
Really? So the whole time you were there, you didn't realize how many people got killed?
No.
Because they never talked about it, huh?
Hmm?
They never talked about it?
Well, yeah, I mean, we talked about crew members that got lost from our sister unit. There was one crew that got lost in flying at night, bad weather. That was a problem. And back on February 5th, 1969, one of our best crews was shot down by an RPG doing a hoist mission, which means you hover above the treetops for several minutes while you let down this thing called a jungle penetrator, which just that is a penetrator, but at the bottom there are three arms you could pull out, and the wounded has to be able to sit on that and embrace the shaft with his arms to get hoisted up. Otherwise, there was this thing called a Stokes litter, which was famous for spinning around because
Right.
it didn't have any other stability. Although I don't remember ever having to hoist somebody on a Stokes litter. We did the jungle penetrators.
So can you tell me how you felt on your first missions? What was it
First
like?
mission,
Yeah.
I don't know. For some reason, there were like 4 of us that came over at the same time and got assigned to the same unit there, and they didn't put us on flight status for at least 3 weeks. You know, we sat around playing nickel-dime poker with paper money. I guess I was scared, of course, but I didn't know what.
Apprehensive, I would think would be a word.
I didn't know what to expect. I was glad to be flying again, but of course, the crew there was 2 pilots, one of which was designated as aircraft commander, and the aircraft commander had total responsibility for the mission, for the aircraft, for the crew members, for everything that happened. He was responsible, and me being what they call quote feeder pilot unquote, mostly along for the ride, switching radio frequencies and stuff like that at first. Should I put it? I didn't do very well flying. I was not a good pilot. One of my aircraft commanders, Bob Romines was his name, let me fly into an LZ, and I went in too fast and bent the skids on landing and nearly wiped out the ground crew. After that, he wouldn't fly with me anymore. But his roommate, Don Marler, was the maintenance officer, and one day he took me up to a relatively secure area west of NY Airfield and taught me how to do a tactical approach. You know, and in flight school you do an approach like this to the ground. You know,
Mm-hmm.
in tactical approach you try to minimize your exposure to ground fire.
Right.
And so we start off more than 1,500 feet above ground level and try to get down above the treetops as quickly as possible, and then go zooming up to the LZ and hoping to have some reference point about when to flare and decelerate and all that stuff. So he taught me that. Actually, what what you do is sort of, you can kick it out of trim, you lower the collective and put in left pedal, it'll go down sideways much quicker than otherwise. So he did that, practiced a few approaches with me until he was satisfied that I would at least be somewhat safe. So after that, Romine still wouldn't fly with me, but anyway, that's the story.
Walter, was all of your flight, was most of your flight, or all of your flight, done medical recovery?
Most of them were field pickups, and
Okay.
some were inter-hospital transfers, and some were administrative, what they call ash and trash, but most of it was field pickups at the 45th Medical Company where I was. They had called three ups, 3 crews on duty. First up took all the missions that came as much as they could, and the second up took, whatever the first up couldn't, and the third up was standby and that administrative stuff.
And you rotated first up?
Yes, right. There were 3 platoons, or were there 3 platoons? I don't know. I think there were 3 platoons. I was in the first platoon to start with, the third platoon later, and a platoon being about 6 aircraft and 12 pilots, something like that. So anyway, halfway through my tour there, I would transfer down to a unit down south in the Delta called the 247th Medical Detachment. They were a new unit, and I thought they were transferring some of us down there to provide some experienced pilots. That was not the case. What they wanted to do was to stagger what they call the DROS, the data returned from overseas, because the 247th, they all arrived at the same time, and they'd all be leaving 365 days later.
Okay.
So they had to stagger that, and I was one of those staggers there. So, but I did better there than at the 45th. Most pilots designated aircraft commander. In other words, being able to take the full responsibility for the mission. Within 6 weeks, 3 months, it's something. It took me 6 months. They said I had a bad attitude. I wasn't aware of that to start with. But I sort of had a chip on my shoulder because I had been drafted, not volunteered. So anyway, then so I think it was March when I went down to 247th. It was September when I came back, and it was November when I went back to the States. You asked about my attitude earlier. Toward the last 2 months, I became withdrawn and more depressed than usual, and
Morose.
I quit writing home for 2 months. It was I don't know what you call that. It wasn't post-traumatic stress disorder. I hadn't been exposed to that much trauma, but it was a stress disorder, all right. What irritated me the most about that was our platoon was short of pilots, and normally when you get close to your DROS or the date to go home, they don't put you on flight status for the last several weeks, depending on the unit and how much leeway, how much slack they have. But they had me flying up until the last week I was there, and out in hoist country, I called it. The military grid coordinates around Zwanlag were X-ray Sierra and some numbers, 4 or 6 numbers, X-ray Sierra 3, 4, 5, 6, 2, 9, whatever. And any time they came on X-ray Sierra, that's a damn hoist mission, and I'm going to have to hover above the treetops and get potentially shot at. But I had good crews. I had great crews all the time. Never had a problem with them, and I wouldn't have survived without them.
You told me in the past that you remember when you landed, you found shells marks on your plane, on your helicopter. So you were clearly shot at while you were up there.
Right. Yeah, there were three times that I know of. One was a night mission, and when we landed, we found there was fuel leaking from the fuel tanks, which were sort of self-sealing, so we made it home without losing all the fuel. And second time it was the caution light came on. It was the transmission oil cooler gauge going off, because an armor-piercing AK-47 round had gone through the bleed air line to the oil cooler. In other words, the air pressure-driven fan on the oil cooler. So we landed not too far from our base on Longpin, and got ferried back, and the maintenance crew came and patched, put in an appropriate piece of equipment and flew it back. So the third time was a little more unusual. There was when they came back, there was a hole in the windshield, right like that, right above my head, and 6 inches lower, and I would have been without a face, or would have been dead. And I realized that, but I should have made it, when that happened, when I was thinking about it, I should have turned the tail around toward the other tree line, but I didn't. So anyway, we did have armor protection. The seats were armored, and there was an armor plate that would slide up, again, next to the window, and we had these things called chicken plates, which were some composite material about that thick, sort of semi-molded to your chest and your back. And since the pilots had armor in the seat, we just wore the chicken plate in the front, and the crew chief and the medic, they sat on the rest of it down on the floor, because they didn't have any armor protection otherwise. And the ballistic helmets were supposedly able to stop or deflect an ordinary 30 caliber round, but I don't know.
Do you have any specific memories of the people that you worked with? Sounds like you had people that mentored you and helped you along.
Yeah. Sort of. Down in the 247th, there was this guy, I can't remember his real name. They called him Festus. So, anyway, I was making a night approach to a village to pick up wounded. It may have been Vietnamese wounded, for all I know. And toward the end of the approach, I was flying. Toward the end of the approach, just before we sat down, there was this jerk, because Festus had pulled up on the collective because I was fixated on the light, and I was going to fly right into the ground, if he hadn't done that for me. So, but me being proud and insecure, never really thanked him for it, but I should have. What else? I don't know.
How many pilots were there?
How many what? Pilots? There's a
On a flight? There was like a co-pilot in the front, cabin.
Yeah, there was an aircraft commander and a Peter pilot, and in the back we had a medic and a crew chief, and the medic was the assistant crew chief, and the crew chief was the assistant
How did you
medic.
fly?
How what?
What were you flying? How did you fly?
How did I fly?
What rank?
I turned on the battery, I turned on the fuel, I pulled the starter switch, got the thing going.
But you were co-jockey all the time, or?
I was what?
Co-pilot, or were you captain?
I was a warrant officer the whole time, but I made aircraft commander, as I said before, after
Okay,
6
aircraft
months.
commander. Okay, you answered my question.
Roughly how many missions was it while you were there?
Oh, I can't remember. Well, you get an air medal for 25 missions,
Okay.
and I had an air medal with, I think, 21 repeats. And it had nearly 1,000 hours of combat flying time, 950 something.
Almost 1,000 hours. Wow.
Yeah, I knew that because I was assistant operations officer of the 247th. I kept track of that stuff.
Okay. So you kept a careful log of everything.
We have to, yeah.
Interesting. Could you show me the pictures?
The
There?
picture, well, this one, probably my favorite. That's on the 247th in Dongtan, and if I remember right, that was a brand new Huey, a UH-1H, and you see my little holster belt there. They issued us a .38 special revolver, and that's what that was. So that's a real after-mission picture. These others were
Were they Colts or Smith & Wesson?
what?
Colts or Smith & Wesson?
A what?
A Colt pistol or a Smith & Wesson?
I said Smith & Wesson 38
It
special.
was, okay.
I was qualified expert in the Colt 45, but that's not what they issued. And these were staged at the 45th Medical Company. This one's a little more natural.
Yeah. That's a nice one.
There's that there.
May I? Thank you.
So, looking back on it, what were some of the things that you learned about your time in Vietnam there?
What did I learn?
What did you learn? What did you bring back?
What did I bring back? Well, when I got out of the Army, I realized that going to college wasn't such a bad idea. It's all that bullshit, so to speak, in the Army. I was ready for something else, and I was much better motivated.
Okay. And were there lessons that you learned about people you worked with and leadership and style when you were in Vietnam?
Well, I don't know. I didn't learn very much. I can tell you about another person that helped me a lot, though.
Yeah.
That was in flight school one afternoon, basic training, basic flight school, primary, in Fort Walters, Texas, one Sunday afternoon. I was shooting pool in the day room with a man named Sergeant Richardson. He was an enlisted man who had volunteered for flight school and been accepted, so he had experience in the Army. And we didn't know each other besides just the name. And he said to me, "Naumann, what are you going to do when you have to go out every day and kill people?" And I don't know what it was about me that made him ask me that question, but it hit home, because by that time the AH-1 Cobra gunship was being developed, and all my classmates wanted to go into gunships. So, but that made me volunteer for a radical evacuation or dust off, so I didn't have to go kill people every day. So that taught me something about myself, I guess.
Mm-hmm. You clearly made lots of close friends and people that when you served there. You have any stories about how you communicated with them and the morale you had with them?
Well, we had, but in 247s especially, it was a closed, small unit, the equivalent of one platoon, and so I remember those people. I'd never really kept touch with them. There was one of the people that came over with me named Tex Davenport, and he had met this nurse and was engaged to be married to her. And when we came back, you know, I was invited to his wedding in Roanoke, Virginia, and her father was a successful trucker, and I had a great time at the good parties and whatnot. And I saw him once more after that, but no, we never really kept track.
After you came back, you said you did some research about the survival rates.
Yeah.
Can you tell me that story?
Well, I might have to do some reading.
Yeah, that's fine, Walter. We're on our second one, so we're good.
So these are statistics from the Vietnam Helicopter Pilot Association. Where, come on. You can edit this out.
Yeah, I can edit it, so no worries.
Okay. Somewhere I got the mortality rate calculated. This would be a big edit.
Me?
Call from B. Christina Miss. Call from B. Christina Miss.
There should be one there.
Afternoon. We were out playing golf today.
Maybe one. Let me go look. So
Okay, go ahead.
have some dust-off statistics to start with. There were about 2,800,000 troops in Vietnam. At the most about 500,000 at a time. There were 303,000 wounded. 150,000 didn't need to go to the hospital. More than 900,000 soldiers survived their wounds. About 47,000 killed in action. The average time from the wound to the surgical table was less than 1 hour. And those who made it to the hospital, 97% survived.
Okay.
So that's an improvement in medical statistics compared to the Civil War and whatnot.
Yeah.
And now for helicopters, you could look it up. But Bell Helicopter built 10,000 Hueys between 57 and 75. A total of about 7,000 served in Vietnam. And of the gunship pilots, wait a minute. Turns out that about 1,565 pilots and crew were lost. Helicopter pilots and crew were lost in Vietnam. 1,400 in gunships, 5,000 in slicks, 670 in others. But I've calculated the mortality rate. That doesn't show up on these things here, but it was for a helicopter pilot. It was about 5% on a total. Although somebody said for dust off it was 33%, but I don't believe that because I didn't see that in my unit.
So about 1 out of 20 pilots
Didn't make it back.
did not make it back.
Right. So I don't know what it was for infantry, you know, but,
Yeah.
well, I don't know for the,
The
for
whole
ground people in general, it was much less than that.
right.
That includes clerk typists and cooks and armorers and whatnot.
Right. Walter, you mentioned sometimes you had pickups for Viet Cong
Yes.
soldiers, and I think you mentioned in the past that sometimes they didn't get the same medical attention that some of the U.S. troops
Right,
did.
yeah.
Tell me about that.
Well, according to policy, civilian injuries from United States inflicted fire had to be picked up, but we didn't treat them in our facilities. We would take them to a Vietnamese hospital and drop them off. Unfortunately for the patients, there was no communication between us and the hospital on the ground. We just we knew where to go. We knew how to fly into that area, and you know, sit down, and the crew chief and medic would unload them and set them down on the sidewalk, and we'd fly off. And most of the time, that was the case, including at the hospital in Saigon. I think it was called Con Hoa or something. It was a big hospital, but they were understaffed as well. Viet Cong, I don't know if we actually picked up any, but we picked up a lot of Vietnamese, a lot of our Army of Vietnam, the Army of the Republic of Vietnam. In fact, most of the time, not most, I guess at least half of the time in the Delta, that's the one we picked up. So the usual maximum load for the UE was like 9, in addition to the crew, 9 people, ambulatory or litter patients. Yeah, that's about probably the most I carried, except for Vietnamese. I think this is right. In the Delta, I think it was 27 Vietnamese that we carried once.
27?
Yeah, they're small people.
Yeah.
And they left their weapons and gear in the rice paddies. They just wanted to get out of there.
Wow. 27 people in one helicopter.
Yeah.
That,
In addition to the crew of 4.
yeah, in addition to the crew of 4. Wow, that's incredible.
So, but that was the UH-1H. That was a good machine. It had
Right.
like 1,400 shaft horsepower instead of 9 or 1,100 from the A and B models. And actually, the 45th Medical Company, the dust off, was the first unit in Vietnam to get the H models. They were a priority for them. And I never ran out of power in them.
You,
Oh, thank you.
excuse me.
However, if I had been up in the highlands and higher elevations and the heat and so on, I would have had to pay more attention to that.
Let me ask you a little bit about when you came back. After you got back from Vietnam, what was the atmosphere like?
Oh, I didn't have a problem with that. I was not harassed or spat upon or whatever.
Okay.
My family was here to meet me at the Minneapolis airport, and I can't remember what happened after that.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, you know, the state of Minnesota was voted a $300 bonus for Vietnam veterans somewhere along the line. I got that when I was in medical school.
Okay.
So I can't say I was not mistreated, although a lot of people were.
I know from I watched the Ken Burns documentary of Vietnam, and he talked about how a lot of the people that came back from Vietnam, they weren't treated well. They were not.
Right.
It's not like World War II veterans.
Right.
And you have any experiences with your?
I had nothing along that.
Nothing along that?
I-
You went right into medical school.
Well, no, I was, after I came back from Vietnam, I was stationed at Fort Stewart, Georgia,
Okay.
and we flew air crash rescue there for the Vietnamese student pilots who were learning to fly fixed wing Cessnas of some sort. So that was November of '70 when I came back. November '69 I came back. I got there in '68. November of '69, and it must have been Thanksgiving in 1970 when one of my buddies in that unit there in Fort Stewart said, "Whoever's not going home for Thanksgiving can come to my house." So I'm the only one that went. There was a small unit, 10 people or so. And there, Dusty's wife, Mary Ann's best friend, Sandra, was visiting, and she was from Fort Lauderdale, and she had come up there with Dusty's brother to visit, and that was a turning point in my life because it was love at first sight, or fascination at first sight, whatever. What was that song? They call it Fascination or something.
Mhm.
Anticipation, all that.
Mm-hmm.
So we were friends after that.
Mhm.
And then I got an opportunity to get out early in January of '71. The Army had like 3,500 helicopter pilots that they didn't need at that time, so I got out early and came up to Minnesota here. I lived with my sister Irene and her husband Jasper on 5700 Pleasant Avenue South.
Mm-hmm.
Went to pre-med at the university, and then carried on this long-distance courtship with Sandra, and we ended up getting married in August of '72. Then she moved up with me to Minnesota here and finished my pre-med studies, and that was accepted into medical school, thankfully. She put me through school with the GI Bill and scarfing up every hour overtime she could at the Dorsey Law Firm downtown.
Walter, how old are you in that picture?
How old was I? That was in '69, and I would have been 25, 24. Yeah.
When you were in medical school, how did your experience in Vietnam make it different? I mean, you were with a lot of other people in medical school that.
Yeah, I was somewhat older, but that didn't really matter. I remained shy and an introvert and insecure and all that sort of thing. So out of a class of 240 people, I knew 3 people.
Wow.
Mulligan, Naumann, and Nelson. 3 lockers in a row.
And lockers, yeah.
And then Nelson's buddy, Dave Antonow. So we 4 sat together in the upper left part of the auditorium.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, so I don't know if my Vietnam experience colored my medical school much at all.
I know that a lot of people that came back from Vietnam were suffering from post-traumatic stress.
Mm-hmm.
Did you feel that impacted you in any way in that stress area?
I don't think. I didn't have bad dreams or nightmares. I continued to drink scotch and wine and stuff, but You know, I didn't get drunk more than once or twice a year at parties or something, you know. So, yeah, I escaped that, I think,
Mhm.
maybe.
Were there any experiences that you had? I know that you obviously saw soldiers that were really shut up. Any of those experiences that you want to talk about, or?
Not really. I usually didn't look at them that closely, but
Yeah.
when we made a field pickup, we'd have to call the medical control office or, you know, and say, you know, this is dust off 3-1. I have 3 whiskeys or 3 wounded. One of them's a head wound, and you know, and he would direct us to. For head wound, had to go to a hospital that had neurosurgery. You know, whereas most of them didn't. And we say our ETA is blank, and
Mhm.
take it from there. When you talk about injuries, I want to talk about my roommate in basic training, roommate in basic flight school, primary flight school. His name was John R. Todd. He was a bon vivant. He and his buddy bought these white MGB convertibles, and so I bought a used Sunbeam Alpine sports car, trying to keep up with him. Anyway, he went into gunships, and on 6th of January 1969, he got shot in the face. He was taken to the hospital. The flight surgeon met him on the pad. He was transferred to Japan, had operations and 1 a week for a long time, and went to rehab and all that. He was blind from his injury and partly deaf. But instead of feeling sorry for himself, he made something of himself. I have one quote from him. He said, I'm blind, but he said, I have my manhood, you know, which was very important at the time, as you can imagine. And so he went to law school, graduated from Georgetown University, got married, had several children. He was a professor at a university in, I think in Michigan, Oxford something. And he was active in Vietnam veterans in the war. He actually believed that we were doing the right thing there, and he spoke out against the groups that vociferously opposed it, and actually worked for President Nixon for a while. He was he was a lobbyist for the Veterans Rights Organization, and he helped get passed a bill which extended benefits to orphans and widows of servicemen, whereas in the past they were excluded. That was his big achievement. So, you know, in spite of his bad injury, he did exceedingly well, and I'm sure I would not have done as well as he did, but I admire him for that. You could look it up, John R. Todd, T-O-D-D.
Okay. You are also a frequent speaker at events in Maryland now.
Right, in my local post of the American Legion.
Uh-huh. Right. Any thoughts on the topics that you talk about at those events?
Oh, I have this thing called this talk on the USS Garrett County and helicopter UH-1H67-1767. So the USS Garrett County was a converted World War II LST, number 786. And she was in the Delta, in the Mekong River Delta, when I was there, and we, a crew from the 45th Medical Company in Long Bend, was sent down there to be an outpost station that, on the ship to support the Navy's riverine operations, or the Brown Navy operations there. And we were there probably for a week. And I know what helicopter it was because I could make out the tail number here. 17167. So what about that helicopter? On the 5th of February, that's the one that was shot down on the hoist mission. We lost our best crew and our best aircraft there. Captain Poole was a big, kindly black man, one of the most kind and gentle people I knew. And they were shot down during hoist mission, their third time in, trying to complete the mission for some ARVN ground forces. It turns out that Captain McCain was the aircraft commander on our stay down there on the USS Garrett County, and he's the one that submitted a war story after investigating the crash. And I can read what he says.
Yeah, go ahead.
2 Army aviators killed in this mission were Captain Poole and Warrant Officer Hicks from the 1st Platoon of the 45th Medical Company in Long Bend. They were flying first up on February 5th when they received a night hoist mission in support of the ARVN in the vicinity of Zwanlock. The crew chief was Spec 4 James McNish, who had named it the Red Baron and decorated it with the appropriate decals and paint. Gary Johnson was a medic, and there was not a better maintained ship or a more efficient crew in the whole company. I was not on the investigation team which recovered the bodies, but was informed by our S3 that the aircraft was apparently hit by a B-40 rocket-propelled grenade and exploded while at a high hover while attempting extracting personnel with their hoist. Their aircraft and crew were torn to pieces and scattered over a large area. It was difficult to identify which pieces went with which corpse and which positive IDs were made from dental records. The crew had made 2 previous attempts to execute the extraction, but were driven off by ground fire. The next day, a small clearing, large enough for a pickup zone, was discovered about 150 yards away from the wreckage site. Don Tempranelli was the XO who did the investigation. He told me that Dustoff 1-3 had been driven off for making a pickup twice by small arms fire before being blown out of the sky with a P-40 RPG. Which comes to talk about the mission to Dustoff. The prototype, or the how should I put it, the man who was Dustoff, Major Charles Kelly, set the tone for the what do you call it? Not the morale, I want to say moral,
The mission?
mission
and
dedication,
values?
the dedication.
Mhm.
His main point when he was picking up, his main point was that we should be picking up people on the ground, and he argued for a medical control of the Dustoff system rather than making it under the Transportation Corps. So he made it sort of more of an independent unit. But he was in an LZ one time, and the ground people were telling him, "Dustoff, get out of here, they're shooting at you." He could see the tracers, of course, but he said, "When I have you wounded." And that was his byline, that was the that was the motto of Dust Stop after that, is that we'll leave when we have your wounded. And he took a round through the heart and died.
Oh.
Yeah, the aircraft flipped over, tore itself up, but the rest of the crew survived. But anyway, so that was Major Charles Kelly, and the ethics of Dust Stop, the morality. If you wanted a bunch of war stories, here's one by Mike Novosel, a Medal of Honor winner. This cover piece is incorrect because it has M60 machine guns hanging out, and we didn't have M60s.
Right.
But Mr. Novosel was a B-29 pilot from World War II, and through a whole series of convolutions ended up being an Army aviator. And this is a story about how we became a Medal of Honor winner. But there's a couple others I could show you.
Yeah.
One called Bullet Through the Helmet by Colonel Douglas Moore. This is written from a officer's point of view. It's a little more high flying, whatever. And then there's one called Dead Men Flying. This is more enlisted, or more of a warrant officer's point of view.
Okay. Well, those are all books about flying helicopters in Vietnam.
It's all about Dust Stop.
Dust Stop.
I didn't bring another book called Dancing with Bullets. It's the memoirs of a Dust Stop medic,
Okay.
and it goes on and on. But if you were interested in the medic's point of view, that's one called Dancing with Bullets. So. Do you want to learn about helicopter aerodynamics?
Well, let's see. We have time. Would you like to talk a little bit about air?
Yeah, I did a little research.
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. Tell us.
Well, the helicopters are basically. Let me back up a little bit. Has a rotary wing, and there was a device called the autogyro, invented by Ron de la Sierre in the first part of the 20th century. And it had a piston-mounted engine, a propeller in front, and a rotor on the top. The rotor was unpowered, but it got its rotation from the aerodynamics of the wind going through it in forward flight. It did not take off vertically. It had to take off more or less like a short takeoff and landing airplane, and it had wings too, of course. So it would, in 1931, a guy named Pitcairn started making them in the United States, and he actually landed at the White House, and President Hoover and his wife and whatnot were there to receive him. And later on, 2015, an activist postal employee named Gary, can't remember, he landed in the White House lawn. He had 533 letters to protest the, what was he protesting? I don't know. Oh, he was protesting waste in government, and corruption, and all that stuff. Things that don't fly very well in Congress. But he had these letters with him to be delivered to the senators and representatives. And of course, they arrested him, and he was convicted of a felony and spent over a year in jail just for that little stunt. But he landed an autogyro that way. They didn't come straight down, but they were kind of at slow speed. So anyway, the point of the story is that when the air flows through a rotor system, it will generate two kinds of forces. One is the lift, which will keep the craft from falling too fast, and the other is some thrust, which will keep the blades going forward. And that's the principle of auto rotation, in which a helicopter with no engine power can land safely.
Right.
And the rate of descent usually 12 or 1,500 feet per minute, the airspeed about 50 to 70 knots. But then at the end, you have all this energy in the rotor system, and before you hit the ground, you yank up on the collective pitch, which increases the angle of attack of all the blades at once, and it cushions the cold. We trade your kinetic energy for kinetic energy of the blade to stop the kinetic energy of the airplane falling.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So you went through training on how to land.
How to rotate.
If your motor fails, you could
Yeah.
still do a landing.
And then in addition, you had pedals which controlled the, in the Huey's case, the tail rotor
Yeah.
to counteract the torque of the main rotor. The main rotor is going this way, which means that if left to itself, the fuselage is going this way.
Right.
So whenever you add pitch or power, you have to add left pedal to keep it straight. And one other thing, which slips my mind. Da-da-da-da-da-da.
Looking back on it, would you do it again? Would you be
I
a
didn't have a
helicopter
choice.
pilot again?
I didn't have a choice. I was just doing what needed to be done. And my attitude was not good. If I had it to do over it again, I might maintain a better attitude. Yeah. I don't know what that other thing was about helicopter aerodynamics. They don't fly themselves, you know,
Right.
it's not like a fixed wing where you can just sort of trim it and put
Right.
them on autopilot and it'll keep going. So.
Right. Takes a long time to learn how to just hover.
Yeah, it does. I can still remember or almost feel the feeling that what happens when you get ready to take off and you pull up on the collective and it starts to get light on its skids and you correct any yaw with the tail rotor you need to, and then go from there. There's something called transitional lift. In other words, when you're hovering, you're spending a lot of energy just making a vortex like this here. And when you start going forward, the airflow goes more streamlined through the rotor and over the body of the helicopter. And that generates some extra lift, and you can feel it going a little shuddering, and you take off better. And at that point, you need to take out some of the left pedal because the aircraft is more streamlined. You don't need that much anti-torque anymore. So when you watch people flying conventional American helicopters where the blade goes this way, yeah, when they take off, you might see them sort of crabbing to the left, whereas they should have taken out some of the left pedal and gone straight. But that's the difference between a really good, smooth pilot and one that's maybe not so good. I don't know. I was. So why do I pick on that? Well, I told you I'm a bad pilot to start with. So that's just something you can look at and see how other people are doing something.
Okay, well, I think we have some good material here. Is there any thoughts, any final thoughts?
Well, like I said, I want to thank the crew chief and the medic and the co-pilots that I had for helping me get through the tour properly, and most of all, I want to thank Santa for falling in love with me, letting me fall in love with her, and helping us live our lives together that way. Without that, I would, I don't want to describe what I'd be like. Wouldn't be very good, though.
Well, I clearly hear a lot of appreciation for the people around you in your voice.
Which I don't know. But I appreciate your support, too.
Yeah. Well, I've told you this in the past, but maybe what I'll do is I'll just put myself in the picture here for just a minute, so I can sit next to you and just say a few things. When I was growing up, you were my hero.
Oh, yeah?
You always were.
Well, I was jealous of your slot cars. I just wanted to play with them.
When I heard you were a helicopter pilot, I learned everything about helicopters. I got every book,
Oh, yeah?
how helicopters work,
Mm-hmm.
and I studied it all. I built every helicopter model I could possibly get my hands on.
Well,
I had a beautiful Huey Bell one. I painted it with the
Mhm.
red crosses
Great.
on it to be the medical one.
Yeah.
And I had it suspended above my bed
Mm-hmm.
when I was a kid. So you were the person that I wanted to be like when I grew up.
Well, that's very flattering. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
I love you a lot. I really.
I love you too, Walter.
Thank you.
Very much. So I just want to show my appreciation to you. You've always been an inspiration, and the one thing I remember when you were in medical school, you brought over a book for me.
Yeah.
It was a book about science, just a
Really?
general science book. And I thought it was just so cool that you would loan this book to me. And I read it, and I really decided from being inspired by you that I was interested in science and engineering and things.
Yeah. I
And
had a book written by George Gamow on science, and I don't know if that was one of them or not. But
yeah, that could have been it. It was a big black one with lots of illustrations, and
this was a small paperback. Anyway.
Yeah, but that was a wonderful gift.
Yeah.
And then I remember when you were in medical school, we would hang out together, and you would have your medical textbooks and calculus and all these other things, and I just would stare at the equations and say, someday I'm going to understand some of
Yeah.
these things. So
Okay.
it
Yeah,
was
you
really
do.
cool.
You did better than I did. In calculus.
No, I don't think that was for you. All right, it looks like Miriam is home,
I brought the mail in.
so I think
A lot of
we'll
mail.
pause it. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
You're recording there.
Oh, we're all done now.
Right.